Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Great Lakes Premier Series here at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Tonight in the booth, you're hearing a bit of a different voice introducing us to the show tonight. You got me, Alex Collins, typically in the second spot, and alongside me, Seth Cole. Seth, how you feeling?
Oh, feeling good. Probably going to feel a lot better after this race than these drivers, though, because as we know, Atlanta may be one of the more difficult racetracks in terms of the racing surface and how they're going to have to preserve those good years. So they got their task cut out for them here tonight. Long race for these guys.
Yeah, not only is it a long race, but it's a scorching racetrack out here tonight. 125-degree track temperature. That's going to start shredding the tires for these guys. What do you think the strategy is going to be tonight for these drivers?
Oh, absolutely. Just preserve those tires. Have a good long run car because if you end up using up those tires early on in this race, you're going to be in big trouble. Right now, with the number of cars we have here in the field and what we've kind of observed in practice, we're seeming to anticipate long green flag runs, potentially green flag pit stops. So if you run into trouble and don't have any good years, say even 15, 20 laps into the run, you're going to be in a lot of trouble in terms of upcoming pit strategy.
Yeah, and the problem these drivers are going to have tonight, I talked to a couple of them, sounds like the fuel window for them is going to be anywhere from 40 to 43 laps. And the reason for that big spread seems to be that as the tires fall off, some drivers run slower than others, save a bit more fuel, and you use a good amount of brake here. So we'll see who's going to have the best pace in the long runs and who can save the most fuel to make it through this 146 lap event.
It's also going to be interesting to see if anybody actually takes the risk of making it over 40 laps here. We know they can make it that far on fuel, but can the tires last that long is going to be the big question. Probably based off the numbers, these guys are going to be looking at least a two-stop, maybe even a three-stop race. It's all really going to depend on if we see any cautions as to how the strategy plays out. Because I'm certain they've worked this race from back to front like you normally do at a mile-and-a-half racetrack. But with cautions, not knowing where they could potentially fall, that could certainly throw a monkey wrench into your strategy pre-race.
Yeah, and these drivers in the pits have only 4 extra set of tires, so if we get some poorly timed cautions, it ends up bringing out a lot of just long enough runs to burn off those tires. We could see a lot of tire strategy come in versus fuel strategy.
We ended up talking last week at Phoenix about tire strategy as well. We saw last week Phil Bedford, really fast car, started on the pole for that race, but started falling back through the field, eventually found himself in some trouble and finished 7 laps down outside of the top 10. Certainly hoping that it's not going to be the same case for him tonight, as he again has a very fast hot rod on the pole in back-to-back weeks. So, we'll see if he learned anything from Phoenix last week into how he's going to approach this race tonight.
Yeah, for him especially, he's going to want to have a bit of a change of fate, but lining up alongside him was the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Didn't have as great of a qualifying run, but had some phenomenal long-run pace, was Jacob Manning on his outside in second there. He is a driver I'm expecting to run very, very well tonight, considering his long-run pace in the race last week, and then just behind them, Barkuski and Branski, 2 drivers who are very, very solid around mile-and-a-halves.
I'll tell you something that kind of stood out to me in the first 2 races. We had Elliott Henderson lead 52 laps, the most laps at Daytona. He finished in 16th place. We had, to your point, Jacob Manning lead 119 of the 200 laps last week, and he had to come to pit road late, ended up finishing back outside the top 5 and 7th. So my advice to everyone watching here tonight, stick around to the end of the race because the dominant car of the night may not be the one going to victory lane.
All right, and as we're coming to the green flag, Phil Bedford's going to lead the way. He gets a good jump, but so does Jacob Manning on the outside, side by side down the front straightaway. It looks like he's going to let him in so he could try and slip in. Not going to do it yet, though. He's going to hold the high side. Phil Bedford clears the field by over a car length as Barkuski and Manning battle for the second position with Branski behind, running the very, very top of the racetrack.
Of course, Atlanta, one of the oldest track surfaces out there. You can see very similar to Auto Club, those seams separating the 3 lanes. It'll be interesting to see where these drivers migrate to in the beginning, middle, and latter portions of the green flag run. I think we're going to see them start low, but we may start to see them migrate higher and higher, mostly because of the fact that that right front, as it heats up, and that car's not going to want to turn on entry as easily as it does in the early going.
Yeah, the only issue with that, though, is the high side does burn a lot more tire than the bottom side, as you're carrying just so much speed around that high side. So drivers who are running up there early right now could be burning up their stuff a little bit too much, as even one lap that runs a little bit too quick can hurt you for the next 10.
A guy you and I were talking about here pre-race, Jacob Branski, has kind of not gotten out of the blocks here this season. We saw him catch fire at the latter portion of last season, but right now up inside the top three, comes into this race currently 10th in the point standings. Now, he had a decent run last week, which moved him up 8 spots in the standings, but certainly you got to think that sooner or later he's going to turn up the wick again and we're going to find him back in victory lane.
Yeah, if there's anywhere I expect Jacob Branski to really show his might, it's going to be here at Atlanta Motor Speedway. He's extremely strong in these B cars, but even better yet, extremely strong at 1.5 miles. And that combination is going to be tough for the field to beat, as we see him battling for that second position around Jacob Manning, using that high lane right up on top. I find that top lane in turns 1 and 2 is very, very strong. Down in 3 and 4, not nearly as much, but he's putting it to good use as he's trying to go around Manning right now. As contact bit is made, that sends Branski up the track, and now Madalena sends it up the middle. 3 wide out of turn 4.
Big move there for Hunter Madalenas. Had the momentum, saw the space, but instead going to just tuck back in line and keep Branski and Manning side by side for that second position. Now, a couple of drivers, it appears, have had some issues at the start. I think Ty Aiken might have started this race from pit road. He's currently a lap down, and Richard Tucker in the 59 currently sits on pit lane. So a couple of drivers with some early issues. I guess if you're going to have problems here at Atlanta, have them in the early stages. We know that there's going to be a stage yellow coming out at the completion of lap 30, so a little bit of time to mount to come back. If you make a mistake late in this race, then there's no recovery time.
Yeah, essentially this entire race is going to be mistake minimization. Even just getting a little bit loose is going to hurt you over that entire run. Something so small can really, really affect you big here at Atlanta Motor Speedway, especially with how hot it is. It's just one slip can kill your run. And one person I'm going to be watching is currently Jacob Manning, who's fallen back to the 4th position. Now he's battling for the 5th position with Brandon Barkuski. He feel like is purposefully backing up to just try and save some tire here for the longer run.
Looking ahead there to Hunter Madalenas and Jacob Branski. I gotta wonder, we know that this track is going to be physically a challenge for these drivers, but in the case there of Jacob Manning, mentally, knowing that he let one get away last week, does that just make it more motivating here today, or is that going to be lingering in the back of his mind to not make the same mistake again in the second time in 2 weeks?
Now, luckily, the mistake he had last week was just fuel management was just not his way in the race last week. So luckily, if this race does go green, we shouldn't have to deal with that as the way the laps are working out. But as we see him, he was very, very strong in the long runs. And I keep saying that because here at Atlanta, that is the #1 way to win these races. If you go any longer than 15, 20 laps, drivers who have really, really good long run pace are going to show their might and immediately find their way at the front of the field.
Right now, Manning under fire from Barkuski for the 4th position. It's the bright green 37 of Elliot Henderson into the mix, as well as the 91 of Austin Moore. Austin Moore was actually pretty fast in practice. It was kind of interesting, too, to try and figure out the lap times we were seeing, who was running qualifying pace, who was running race pace, because we saw a number of lap times up there in the 31s, which we obviously dubbed as qualifying attempts before qualifying session actually took place. And I remember you saying that if anybody out of the gate here today in the first 5 laps of this race ran a 31, we were going to see them free falling through the field maybe in the next 5 laps after that. So far, everybody right now running around the 32 flats to maybe the 32 threes up here inside of the top 5 and even back to the latter half of the top 10.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the best lap times of all the drivers, luckily none of them did that, as I don't see a single 31 on the board, so congratulations to the field. But somebody who may have run a little bit too hard is our current leader, Phil Bedford, as I see Jacob Branski behind, really gapping Madalenas and running down Phil Bedford for the lead. So we may see a battle for the lead in the next coming laps, as we're still currently watching in the back between Barkuski and Austin Moore fighting for that position. I believe that's for the 6th spot, and it looks like Austin Moore will take it around the outside. But that's something we're going to be watching out for, seeing who goes forward, who goes back, and later on in the race, we'll see if these drivers adjust for it.
Obviously, you've had success here at this racetrack, and I'm just kind of observing the lines that our top two are running. Looks like over here in 1 and 2, Branski runs a half groove, maybe even a groove higher than Philip Bedford, and then maybe a half groove lower over in 3 and 4. I would have to assume that that's that trying to avoid aero tightness, trying to get clean air to the nose for the 23.
Yeah, I would imagine that's probably what it is too. Clean air is much bigger of a deal here at this racetrack because of how much aerodynamics and downforce helps your tire wear. If you're sitting in the dirty air of somebody, you're going to really punish those tires trying to get around the corners. But something that I'm watching all of these drivers do so far, I'm barely seeing anybody run lower on the racetrack down here in turns 1 and 2. I'm certainly shocked about that, as I figure the high side up there just really punishes the tires, and yet everybody's doing it.
Maybe the lowest I've seen anybody get in 1 and 2, they've gotten their right sides down on that lower seam. They haven't gotten their left sides. Well, as soon as I say that, they get their left sides, both Manning and Henderson, down on that white line. But yeah, it seemed like they've given that white line a little bit of space, about half a groove of space each circuit around here. Maybe as the pace starts to back off and they start to lift a little bit earlier for the corner, the car will drift further down there to that white line. But it kind of seemed when they had those fresh tires, they didn't really want to go down there.
Yeah, it could be because you can carry a lot more speed around the high side. I've noticed that on brand new tires, that high side down in turns 1 and 2 at least is definitely a lot quicker than down here in 3 and 4 it is. But the one key is that I feel neither the top nor the very, very bottom in 1 and 2 is the best. I find that the middle, somewhere in the middle, is the best. It's the smoothest, yet you're not carrying nearly as much speed around as right there where Elliot Henderson was to make that pass. There's a lot of bumps there on the bottom of turn 2, and that could really upset the car later in the run as the rear tires start to wear off.
Now, so far this season, we've gone 2 for 2 in different drivers going to victory lane. William Barber-Gilletta there in the 27, and right behind him, Christopher Heller. Barber-Gilletta winning at Daytona and Heller last week at Phoenix. But at least out of the gate, neither one of our former winners really making their presence felt up inside the top 5. Right now, just riding, it seems, in the 9th and 10th positions.
Yeah, that's the problem, too. I mean, we're still not even halfway through this run yet. We can't say whether or not they're going to be off the pace here today or not, as they simply could just be saving tires. As where they're sitting right now, they don't really need to race for position. They can just wait as they're seeing all the guys racing up here for position. This absolute gaggle of cars, 2 by 2 for 2 rows deep, with Barkuski behind just watching it happen. Elliot Henderson, Austin Moore going at it. Madalena is starting to go to the high side. He slips up a little bit, almost gets into the wall. That'll allow Jacob Manning to slip in a line there. These guys are racing crazy hard for this spot.
There's probably a bucket of popcorn in the cockpit of the 51 of Nathan Nicholson, because he's got a front row seat of all this going on ahead of him. Double wide 2 rows. It was 3 wide for a slight moment there. Now they're going to get a little bit more in an orderly fashion, but still side by side for that 3rd position. Austin Moore, he's been slowly making his way up towards the front on that inside line, as you were documenting there. Seems to be the only one that runs the low line through 1 and 2 as well as 3 and 4, and started this race from the 6th position, currently up inside the top 3, even though he's going to try and fend off a challenge from Henderson now on the top side.
Yeah, and I did notice a little bit there off turn 2. He was on the very bottom, but he did slip a little bit sideways, just a little bit off turn 2 there, right over the bumps where I said, and that allowed Elliott to get side by side, but it seems like everybody behind him out of turn 4 proceeded to get loose. What I noticed while trying to test this car earlier before the race was that it is a little bit slick on corner exit. And the one big thing when you have a loose race car is to go into the corner a little bit harder and drag a little bit more brake to keep it steady on corner entry so that you don't burn off that right rear. And that could be something that Austin Moore is doing, is I'm seeing him go into the corner deeper than most other drivers around him are doing.
Nathan Nicholson completing a pass there on Elliot Henderson. Would be for 6th, as now Manning jumps to the inside rather of Austin Moore for 3rd place. But keeping my eye on that interval from first to second, and it is starting to close up. It was about half a second, and this time around it's going to be somewhere in the vicinity of a little more than 3/10. So slowly but surely, Branski is starting to reel in Philip Bedford for the race lead.
Yeah, I've been keeping tabs on them a little bit. I've noticed their lines have started to change a little bit. They were pretty much glued to the high side earlier on in the race, but now they've started to move a little bit towards the middle line. Branski's still pretty committed to that high side up there, as we see right now, but Bedford has pretty much decided to just run the middle lane both ends of the racetrack, and I think that's pretty much the smart thing to do. It's not the exact lane that I like to run around this racetrack, but it's definitely one that works very well. Like, where he's running right now is where I prefer to run down here in this corner. So, but currently right now he is getting caught up by Branski, who's definitely running a very solid pace here in the second half of this run.
Starting to see some shadows creeping onto the racetrack here. The sun behind the clouds for a brief moment, and I don't know, would that in any way affect the racetrack here, especially over in 1 and 2? Would there be enough time for it to cool the racetrack down a little bit, offer a slight amount of grip to these drivers?
Well, I just currently checked in on the temperature as we see side by side for the lead just went down a couple degrees just from the clouds alone. That could have helped Branski make that maneuver right there, as when it gets cooler, you get a lot more grip, and they're side by side heading into turn 1. Branski taking the low side, Bedford committing all the way to the top, leaving the middle open. It looks like Bedford held the middle pretty good. He should get the run off and should be able to clear Branski, and he will, going down into turn 3.
Big power move there from Bedford, saying not so fast. I want to be out in front a little bit longer here. See if that battle culminates again for the race lead, as they're side by side now for the 6th position. Saw these two side by side for 4th a few laps ago, but now they've lost a couple of spots to Jacob Manning, Nathan Nicholson, and Brandon Parkuski. So now this is the battle for the final spot inside the top 5 between Moore and Henderson.
Yeah, and you see them still pretty committed to the high lane, but they've backed up to the drivers we mentioned a little bit earlier, William Barbagelata and Christopher Heller, who have just been sitting back there. So they might make up a couple positions here just by not really battling that hard and relaxing. Looks like Barbagelata might give a bit of a bump to Madalinas behind, got him a little bit loose on the high side. This battle just back here is really intense, as RJ Williams is now inside of Christopher Heller. These drivers are starting to go at it back here.
Indeed. You've also got R.J. Williams and Zachary Henry back in this group, just a little bit further back is the 42 of Nick Martin, and the battle for the lead may be on, is right up to the back bumper. Branski on Bedford. Takes a peek to the outside here through 3 and 4, but Bedford, I mean, how much mirror driving is Bedford doing right now? Because obviously you want to keep the dirty air on the nose of the 23, but at the same time, if you're Bedford, I don't think you necessarily want 23 Branski to force you to step outside your comfort zone and run a line that maybe you're not quite familiar with yet. You want to run where you know your car is best.
Yeah, luckily with these Xfinity cars versus the Cup cars, which was run last season, you don't nearly have to mirror drive as much. You more just have to manage your own race car, especially at this racetrack. It's a lot less about just dumping dirty air on them or just picking whichever lane you think is best. If anything, when I'm running around this racetrack, I just try and figure out which lane is the fastest, and I stick to it no matter what the driver behind me does, because I know I'm going to be running the faster lane, and they're going to have to find somewhere else to run.
See how aggressive Branski's going to get here as well, because remember, we have that stage caution coming out in the next 3.5 laps or so, and I'm certain that he would love to be able to get himself a stage victory here, which would mean a playoff point. And of course, with that stage caution coming out, he can use up these tires right now, because more than likely, when the yellow comes out and pit road's open, everybody's going to come down and change off this set.
Now, something I think I just noticed looking at the back end of our leader's race car, he has a little bit of rear end damage. I think there was a bit of contact between him and Branski, as he did not have that about 5 laps ago, so that's new.
And something's happened to Hunter Madalinas as well, who just free fell from the 7th spot all the way back to 13th in the closing stages of this first stage.
Now, I wasn't sure who it was back there just before we cut away from the battle to look at the lead before, but I thought I saw a car hit the wall. It may have been Madalinas, because he's been on a free fall ever since.
Also notice just up ahead of the leaders, I think that is Ty Aiken and the 71, who's returned back to the racetrack. Nope, correction, that actually is Tyler McClellan. So McClellan is hoping that the leaders don't catch him so he can stay on the lead lap. Same for Ty Aiken, because Aiken, who's back on the racetrack 1 lap down, would like to get the free pass on this upcoming stage caution.
Yeah, and this stage is pretty much just going to give everybody a free reset and say, all right, where did we stack up over this run? What do I have to change? What's the pace that I have to run? I know I used to actually run this track a little bit too easy, and I would actually not run hard enough. So for some drivers, that could be the answer. For many others, it might be I just ran a little bit too hard. It's just in front of the leaders. I see lap car of Tyler McClellan. He actually just hit the wall just ahead of him. This could affect the finish of this stage as the drivers are coming out of turn 4 just now, side by side, but it looks like Phil Bedford's going to get it going on to lap 30.
Boy, a big save there by Branski, who gave it one last attempt on the inside out of 4, and he got wicked loose. That back end was fishtailing. So he'll finish second. Bedford will pick up the stage victory with Nathan Nicholson, Jacob Manning, and Brandon Barkuski, the top 5. Barbara Gelada, Henderson, Henry, Williams, and Moore, who dropped 3 spots in the final 2 laps of this stage, will finish out in the 10th position. They'll all get stage points here under our first caution of the evening. Stage caution here at the completion of lap 30. Ty Aiken should get the lucky dog, and we should have all 16 of our drivers that are still running back on the lead lap when we head into the final stage.
Yeah, luckily for Tyler McClellan, he managed to hold on to the lead lap. Ty Aiken's definitely going to get back on the lead lap. But I'm looking at Barbara Gelada. He was well back there, kind of just relaxed and found his way up to 6 at the timing end of the stage. So he's going to be one we might have to look out for now that he's got a little bit of more track position versus earlier on in the race. But somebody else who I thought was going to start moving up but actually ended up free-falling towards the end of that stage was Christopher Heller. And I believe I might have caught a glimpse of him getting loose inside of a battle, and mentioning earlier in the race how getting loose just once can kill your tires. I think that's exactly what happened for Christopher Heller.
Yeah, if you look at a couple of drivers that look like they managed their tires on this long run, Nathan Nicholson falls into that. He was up 7 spots from his starting position. Barbara Gelada up 6 spots, and RJ Williams climbed up 5 spots from his 14th starting position. All 3 of those drivers getting stage points. So are those some of the guys that we're looking at to possibly be up here towards the front in the closing stages of this race? Or are other drivers going to catch on to what they did here on this run, and it's actually going to be a good half dozen, maybe 8 or 9 drivers that are still going to have themselves in the conversation for this trophy?
Well, I mean, currently the 2 favorites after that 30-lap run is definitely going to be between Phil Bedford and Jacob Branski. But look who just came out second behind Phil Bedford. Nathan Nicholson with a fantastic pit stop, jumping multiple drivers to get up to the front of the field. So that's going to be a great starting position for him. And looking back in the field, Jacob Branski, who finished second in that stage, free fell all the way to the 6th position. So we have a complete flip-flop here at the front of the field.
Definitely do. Nathan Nicholson up 6 spots on the racetrack, up 2 spots with that stop on pit lane here under this yellow flag. And while he's obviously also looking to pick up his first victory on the season, also looking to take the points lead, because it's pretty close between your top 4 coming into this race. Christopher Heller took the points lead over last week with his victory, but Nathan Nicholson sits only 4 points back. Zachary Henry, who's been slowly working his way up through the field, he was up just outside the top 5 when that stage yellow came out. He's 3rd in points, 15 points out, and Daniel Nanny, unfortunately not in the field here tonight, had a great run last week. He came into this race 4th in the point standings, and there was only 16 points back, so things still really close. As we know, early on in the season, you can gain and lose a lot of positions depending on your performances.
I mean, we saw that last week at Phoenix. Fuel strategy ended up causing a lot of drivers who looked pretty comfortable to have a very nice points day ended up free-falling to the back of the field because they were forced to pit late in the race, while other drivers who just stayed conservative gained a ton of spots, Daniel Nanny being one of them, who didn't have as good of a day as I expected, but because of field strategy, found his way into the 2nd position. And the one person who capitalized on that fuel strategy is Christopher Heller, currently in the 10th position in this race. May possibly end up being a question with these 40 to 43 lap fuel runs that we've got, and just about, I would say, looks like it's going to be 105, 106 laps before the end of the race for these drivers.
It's interesting. You touched on a couple of these guys during those first 30 laps, possibly brushing the wall. I noticed there's a good half dozen drivers that spent a little extra time on pit road, including Christopher Heller and Hunter Madalinas, RJ Williams, Elliot Henderson, Austin Moore. So it's looking like this outside retaining wall has played havoc with a good maybe half dozen drivers here in the early going.
Yeah, and that's something that I expected to happen when I was doing some of my testing. Even running on my own, I felt like sometimes if you didn't get your corner entry right, you would start to wash up the track on corner exit, and I had to jump out of gas just to not hit the wall. Maybe some of these drivers might have felt a little bit more comfortable about it while they were racing, maybe used a bit more front tire and just overdid it and ran into the wall. That's something really easy to do tonight, and that could be something that could determine who wins this race, because if anybody at the front of this field hits the wall, he could damage the car enough to slow them down.
Obviously, the Premier Series for the Great Lakes, they're currently the first series to come to Atlanta Motor Speedway here for their season. We know that next week, Great Lake Truck Series will be here at Atlanta. I mean, do you think that we got some drivers that aren't necessarily in tonight's race that are observing this, taking notes for when they climb into their trucks and take to this racetrack?
Could possibly be. We could likely be seeing the track be just as hot, but we're going to be going to green and see who's going to be hot on this restart. Phil Bedford leading him away. Nathan Nicholson spins the tires extremely bad. That allows both Jacob Manning, Brandon Barkuski to duck inside. He's now 3 wide going into turn 1 with Barber Gelada and Branski. That was an absolutely horrible restart there from Nicholson. He's in a free fall to the back of the field as now Manning in second is moving forward alongside Barkuski. No battle at the front of the field, but here comes Branski from the 6th spot, already in 4th position, battling for 3rd.
He will jump to the outside of Barkuski for that final spot on the podium. A nice save there by Nathan Nicholson, but then I think he brushed the wall off of turn number 2, so he will free fall back to around the 9th position. Very fortunate there, though. When we end up seeing a car dart that quickly with spinning the tires, usually it snaps around. That would have been right up at the front of the field, so dodged a bit of a bullet there, did everybody in this field here at that moment in time.
Yeah, that was a great save from Nathan Nicholson. Good job for him to not lose the car on that. I've seen that happen a ton of times here at Atlanta Motor Speedways. Right at the front of the field, Jacob Manning looks to the inside of Phil Bedford, just not getting enough of a run on corner exit to race side by side into the next corner, but he's driving a lot more aggressive than I typically expect this long run driver to drive as they both head to the high side. Manning is going to crossover down to the bottom. He might get the run this time, head down to turn 3. He's on the quarter panel, side drafting down into turn 3. Can he make the move for the lead?
So far, Philip Bedford's been able to turn back all comers, but he's not going to be able to this time. Clear off of turn number 4. New leader for the first time this evening is going to be Jacob Manning in the number 1. He goes to P1, but here comes Bedford looking back to the inside. Nothing doing as Branski just made his way to 3rd around Barkuski. A couple, not necessarily slide jobs, but kind of mini slide jobs there in the pass for the lead and the pass for 3rd.
I feel like when we're talking about asphalt, it's pretty much a slide job. There's not much better than you could have done of what Branski just did there, but something I heard over the driver radio was Phil Bedford essentially just say, you know what, don't worry about me, go ahead. He's just going to let these drivers by and just run his own race right now, as now there's no more guaranteed cautions. This could go green all the way to the end of the race, and he's just running his own pace all the way as Branski once again sends a huge sender up for the 2nd position as we're looking a little bit towards the back of the field here. Christopher Heller struggling a little bit back here, and we're seeing where Nathan Nicholson ended up side by side with Elliot Henderson back there.
We jump back there to Christopher Heller because I'm pretty certain I saw him just slam the wall on the front straightaway last time by, and he dropped about 3 positions from 9th back to where he is now, currently in the 13th position. So Atlanta has not been kind here in the early going to last week's winner.
Yeah, I did just look at his car. He does have some pretty significant right front damage, so I think that'll severely hamper his race performance here. But at the front of the field, Jacob Manning gapping the field by a massive margin already, 0.6 of a second over Jacob Branski. heading down into turns 3 and 4. Branski pulling out by almost 4/10 over Phil Bedford behind, and somebody who we didn't get to talk about in the first run wasn't really up there. Nick Martin in the 5th position, running nice and pretty up there just behind Brandon Barkuski.
It started back in the 8th position, fell back to as far, I think it was around the 12th or 13th spot, and then started picking up spots closer to the end of that first stage. So definitely a good long race car, and got himself some good track position there. I don't know if it was necessarily on pit road or when we had that whole stack up with everybody thinking that maybe Nicholson was going to go around, but now up here inside of the top 5 and running lap times similar, if not maybe just a tick quicker than a couple of the guys ahead of him.
Well, I'm looking at it. I'm not looking to see who's faster right now. I'm looking to see who's actually slower, because those are the drivers who, once we get around a lap 55 to 60, we're going to start to see them move forward. So I'm actually not liking a couple of these drivers up front running really hard lap times. I mean, Jacob Manning right now was 0.2 faster the previous lap than Nick Martin in the back there. And this time by, he was about a 10th faster than a couple of the other guys, but did slow down a little bit. So he is starting to readjust for this longer run, but ran some really, really hard laps there early on.
So you mentioned about the fuel window for these guys here tonight. By my calculations, with us going back green, they're going to have to make at least 2 trips to pit road. So do you kind of take the final 115 laps and kind of split that into thirds, or do you think we're going to see some varying strategies on when drivers are going to come down pit lane?
I mean, that definitely is a question. I guess for some of these drivers, it's just a matter of how comfortable do they feel everybody else is going to race. Do you expect that caution to come out? If you do expect that caution to come out, you're just going to run this out as long as you can, and if not, just have a very, very short final pit stop to try and make up time that way. But if you do expect this to go green, you might see some of these drivers come in anywhere from 5 to 10 laps earlier than these stint ends and try and split that race into thirds.
You know, you mentioned about execution here in this race, and this is maybe the, if not one of the hardest pit lanes to get onto, especially when you've been out there on a long run, because those rear tires are worn, there's not a heck of a lot of grip, and then you got to bring it down off the high banking of turn 4 onto a very slippery, flat apron to be able to get onto pit lane. So that's something that these guys might be dreading if we end up getting ourselves into a round of green flag pit stops. Certainly hope that they might have done a little bit of long run practice here and practice getting onto pit lane to know just exactly if those rear brakes are going to take and if those tires are going to give them enough grip that they don't loop it around.
Yeah, more than anything, I mean, I know I personally like to run a bit lower of a brake bias around here just to get the front tires to work on corner entry. If some of these other drivers also run that, you have to be extremely careful on the brakes, as if you hit them a little bit too hard, this car snaps around faster than you can handle, and it will spin on corner entry.
You were talking about being a little bit worried about Jacob Manning's lap times. A couple laps ago, Philip Bedford got back around Jacob Branski, and that last time by, actually the last 2 laps, he has been about a 10th quicker than the one car.
Yeah, I mean, Bedford immediately started out this run almost 0.2 slower than most of his other competitors. So he started out the way I like to start out these runs here at Atlanta, and just immediately let people by who want to run really fast and just run my own race. And right now I'm starting to pay off as he's starting to come back for that lead again.
Mentioned about Ty Aiken getting the lucky dog under the stage caution. Got his lap back, but then the following lap after we went green, brought his car down pit road and has gone to the garage. He'll finish in 16th position here tonight. 15 drivers still remaining, all 15 on the lead lap, and we got some double file racing back here around the 8th to 11th position. 2 rows of double wide.
As much as I'd love to say these drivers are just having a really good run back here, most of these cars are just damaged, so you don't know whether it's the damage slowing them down or whether they're running good on pace, but all we know is that all of them at least have a little bit of damage, and they're very separated from the front of the field. 1.5 seconds from Zach Henry in the 6th position, all the way to Elliot Henderson in the 7th position. So there's massive gaps in the field right now. Is massive contact for Barber Gelada into the wall. That's where I've seen a lot of drivers start to hit this walls down there in turn 2, and we just saw an incident of it right there.
I'm not so certain that RJ Williams got away unscathed. I think he might have just gotten into the back of the 27, might be dealing with some potential damage on that right front. I mean, you talk about these drivers getting damaged. How does that affect the race car for the remainder of the run in terms of handling?
Well, I mean, it all really depends where it gets hit. I've noticed, somewhere where it gets hit, like, say, on Phil Bedford's car in the back end of the car, it typically doesn't really affect the car that much. It might slow it down a little bit on the straightaways, but it doesn't really hurt you too much in the corners. But for most of these other drivers further in the back, if you hit that right front, like a lot of them have been doing, it slows down the car massively, increases the drag down the straightaways a ton, and can sometimes make the car extremely tight, as it sometimes damages the splitter as well.
So with potential green flag pit stops coming up in the near future, is it worth it if you're a driver coming down pit lane to have a little bit of that damage possibly repaired, maybe even spend a couple extra seconds on pit lane? Or basically at this point in time, if we go green from start to finish, do you just have to deal with that damage that you get for the remainder of this race?
I mean, sadly for these drivers, I feel that if it does go green, you are just going to have to deal with what you got. You're going to be able to fix just a little bit within the normal time of a pit stop, but spending that extra time trying to fix the race car, you're just not going to be able to make that time up on the racetrack, as you never can fully get that damage fixed all the way. So you're just going to have to deal with it, and that's a problem these drivers are going to have to deal with for the most part, especially since it could trick you earlier on in the runs where you might run a little bit harder than you think you should be.
Riding on board here with Brandon Parkuski, and I think just to kind of give people an idea of what these drivers deal with in terms of grip, just watch that orange tape there on the top of the wheel. That's where it shows if the wheel is centered or if the toe is knocked out, and just watch the hand motion there. A lot of counter steering off of the corner, even a little bit of counter steering in the center of the corner. These drivers feeling that back end, wanting to step out on them as those rear tires continue to wear down.
Oh yeah, you'll see right here, he starts to counter steer off the corner exit. It gets real light down there on the transition of the bank and onto the straightaway. These straightaways are very, very flat here at Atlanta Motor Speedway, not a lot of banking. So when these drivers come off the corner, it really lightens up in the rear end. It can really come around on you faster than you think.
Don't look now. About 3.5 car lengths the advantage that Jacob Manning has over Philip Bedford now. Their lap times have equaled in the last couple of laps. The last time by, only 3 1/1000ths different between the two. And I almost wonder if maybe that is because Philip Bedford, now starting to enter into the wake of Jacob Manning, might be dealing with that aero tightness and might have to search around a little bit for clean air to the nose.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, once you get that close, dirty air really becomes a big deal, especially on these corner exits right there. Philip Bedford got really, really loose out of turn 2. That's something we don't really talk about too much in these cars, but it is something that we've seen come to light in the new next-gen car here on iRacing, is that when you get a little bit loose behind another driver and you slide up into clean air, it'll spin that car around faster than you expect, and there's a little bit of that in this car. It will get more loose than you expect when that clean air dumps on the front end while you're loose, and that's something we just saw right there with Phil Bedford.
We talk about wearing down the tires. Of course, a big part of that is when the tire temps skyrocket the longer you go into these runs. Now, the short tracker in me knows that, if you end up sliding the back end off the corner and those rear tires temperatures start to kick up, you take it a little bit easy, wait for those tire temps to cool down maybe a little bit, and you'll have a little bit more grip. Is it possible to do something like that when you have a slide like Bedford just had?
Well, problem is these drivers are running in temperatures well over the hundreds here on the racetrack. So this racetrack is punishing when you slide like that, and it overheats the tire very, very quickly. I mean, to the point where you really can't even get all the way out of the gas. As if you get all the way out of the gas and jump out of it, you can slide the car on corner entry even. So you have to drive super carefully to recover that tire, and you will likely lose positions just trying to do that.
Saw Branski running very low there as he was battling with Brandon Barkuski, but the outside line gets that momentum and prevails for the 25s to move him up to the third position. Branski, as soon as he got past, back up to the top side as well. Top 4 right now have gapped themselves to almost a second and a half back to the 5th place running Zach Martin, who then is kind of in a zip cone of his own because it's another half second to 6/10 before you get to the 7th place car of Zach Henry.
Yeah, and something I am watching right now is Brandon Barkuski has made a move on right now. He was battling with Branski for a while, but not side-by-side battling. He was just hovering back there, waiting for his opportunity to pass. Now that he's passed him, he looks significantly quicker than our leaders right now. Again, running that high side. I've been surprised to see that be working so well tonight, but it just seems to be working out for these drivers.
And Barkuski kind of break out here this season. Had a 12th place run at Daytona. Last week finished back in the 12th position at Phoenix, but up here inside of the top 3 and looking for more as he got to the left rear quarter panel of Philip Bedford, but not quite able to make the move here into 1 and 2.
Yeah, I remember last season, Barkuski was one of our stronger drivers here at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and he also is very, very strong at Darlington Raceway as well. 2 racetracks where tire wear is a massive deal, so he's got a good handle of how to manage your tires, and we're seeing it right now as he's running a very, very strong pace right now behind these 2 leaders.
And in the last 10 laps, we've kind of had a mass exodus from this race. See another 3 drivers now back in the garage area. William Barbagelata in 13th, Hunter Brittle in 14th, and Tyler McLennan in 15th. So just like that, we're down to a 12-horse race. And one of those drivers, Hunter Madalinas, was on pit lane about 3 laps ago and made a pit stop. So he is currently running the only car 1 lap down.
Yeah, he did come into the pit lane, sadly a little bit earlier than you would hope to come into the pit lane here at this race, but we might be seeing drivers start to come down in about anywhere from 12 to 15 laps if they're trying to split it into thirds. And I think with how the field is spread out right now, we could see that be the prevailing strategy. But Brandon Barkuski with a power move around Phil Bedford, but Phil Bedford comes back with a crossover. Doesn't have enough of a run down the straightaway to catch him, though. That keeps Barkuski in second on his way towards the leader.
Yeah, Barkuski got himself a little bit of help, too. A big mistake for Phil Bedford. Last time by out of turn 4, got really loose. I thought for a moment he was going to overcorrect it into the outside safer barrier, but he did not. Now he'll drop back into that 3rd spot behind Barkuski and only about maybe 3 car lengths ahead of Jacob Branski, who continues to run down there on that white line, especially through 1 and 2.
I mean, I do like that Branski is running that line down at the bottom. I feel like you just run through the corner a little bit slower than you are on the high side. I've been saying it, but none of these drivers have been doing it. But now that Branski's starting to do it, we saw him fall off once Barkuski got by him. But since he started running that bottom lane, he started to find his long run pace back a little bit. So maybe running this lane is going to be the better lane on these longer runs, and these drivers just haven't figured it out yet.
All of a sudden, Nick Martin might be in trouble for that 5th position. Been watching the last couple of circuits around, and Zach Henry has closed up what was a 0.7 of a second gap to now a little under half a second. And he's been running about maybe a tenth and a half quicker each time. There you saw the fresh tires of Hunter Madalinas blowing by the both of them. That's something that we're going to be having as our main talking point when these pit stops begin, because drivers that come down pit road early, they're going to have really good out laps, which will allow them to be able to close up track position with the drivers that were around them when they came down pit road. On the flip side, though, the drivers that may elect to stay out a little bit longer, they'll have the benefit of that out lap when the other drivers' tires are anywhere from maybe 2, 3, 4 laps old.
Yeah, and the problem is those drivers who come in for new tires can really affect the battle between the drivers on old tires, really harm their pace. And sometimes I've seen where if enough drivers come in and there's still some guys out, you can't even get to the bottom lane to come into the pit lane, and you end up staying out longer than you want to stay out. So that's something we're going to have to watch out for. I think I saw in the back, Barkuski might have nipped the wall with the back a little bit off turn 2. Doesn't look like he has any damage, so he got away with it, but that is not something you want to do this late in the run.
Certainly not. Barkuski's shown that he has a really good race car, definitely could be in the running for the victory here tonight, and certainly would not want to throw it away as we are approaching the halfway point of this race. Bedford's going to make a charge again here to the inside for the 2nd spot, and both these drivers, even though they're battling For P2, they are starting to actually close in on the race leader, Jacob Manning, as well. So it could be a three-man fight for the top position with green flag pit stops looming.
I mean, these green flag pit stops are going to be coming soon. These drivers so far have been out on a 35-lap stint, as we're seeing Christopher Heller come in, but he had a lot of damage, so I kind of expected him to come in a little bit earlier. These drivers are within about 7 laps from the maximum fuel window, 4 laps from it opening up, so we could see these drivers coming in, making their first pit stop, and this could really separate the field out.
Now, if you're any one of these drivers up here inside of the top 4, do you kind of set the precedent and come to pit road before everybody else try and take advantage of those fresh tires on that out lap? Or do you maybe take the chance that someone might make a mistake trying to get onto pit road and a caution might fly? Because the last thing you want to do is be running this well, make a pit stop, fall a lap down, and then the caution pins you -1 and puts you back in traffic.
I actually much prefer trying to be one of the later ones to pit in during green flag pit stops here at Atlanta Motor Speedway. I find that even just 1 lap on tires makes you so much slower than any other driver who has newer tires behind you. And even though you get that massive gap early on before they come into the pits, that closes up surprisingly fast. So no matter what position you're in, especially if you're in a position like Jacob Branski back there behind all these drivers, it might be beneficial for him to just kind of stay out and get out of the dirty air just to run a couple laps before he comes into pit, because he'll be in clean air on those brand new tires that are better than everybody else's.
He's going to try and get the 3rd position here before he comes to pit lane. He'll get to the inside of Philip Bedford. Bedford, as mentioned, he's had his hands full the last couple of times around here. He's been really loose through the center of the corner, trying to catch it on exit. And whoa! Right ahead of them, Barkuski with a big moment.
And that was on the straightaway, too. I'm surprised to see that happen down there. I know you're turning a little bit down there, but these tires must really be getting away from these drivers as, oh, Branski almost runs into Phil Bedford on corner exit there. These drivers are really starting to lose the race car, and even behind them, Nick Martin's actually starting to run them down.
And this makes me a little bit worried because we talked about how treacherous it is getting onto pit lane. If they're having this much trouble out there on the banking and even to the point there, Barkuski on the flat straightaway, can't imagine what they're going to have to deal with when they come off the banking and onto the apron for their green flag pit stop.
Well, that just reminded me of something we saw last year in real life at Atlanta Motor Speedway in the Xfinity Series, where Austin Cindric had such a poor setup that he wasn't even able to go full throttle down the straightaway, as we're seeing Elliott Henderson, and I believe that's Nathan Nicholson pitting in just now. Yes, it is. These drivers are making the first pit stops here on the lead lap. They're going to go a lap down now, so if we see a caution from somebody spinning out onto the pit lane, they'll be trapped, but they'll find a lot of track position on these new tires after everybody comes in.
Well, so far, we've had 3 drivers come down pit lane now, and none of them, to my knowledge, have spun on entry, so maybe, just maybe, we're going to be able to have everybody safely make it onto pit road for their green flag pit stops. But I've been trying to figure out here, too, for some of these guys that are up inside of this top 5, you see there Barkuski running maybe a groove off the white line. Branski's maybe running the lowest there through 3 and 4. You talked about the entry from turn 4 to pit lane. I mean, what do you think it's going to be for the preferred line for some of these guys on coming to pit road? Because they're all wadded up from 2nd back to 5th. Last thing you want to do is maybe be a half groove up and be trying to come to pit lane when somebody behind you is running that exact same groove and they're not going to pit that lap.
Well, luckily the one thing here at Atlanta Motor Speedway is that because the faster lane seems to be that middle, maybe right on the seam, leaving just enough room for a car length right on that white line on the bottom, if you're coming into the pit lane just to be safe, you're better off running the very, very bottom, especially since you'll be going slower into the corner, and you could just run a bit of a slower corner to make your pit road entry a little bit easier and a little bit less treacherous. But somebody who right now probably doesn't need to worry that much about that, with a 1.5 second gap over the rest of the field, is our current leader, Jacob Manning. After all the problems we've seen with the drivers behind, he's pulled out a massive gap as he's coming into the pit lane right now.
So Manning will give up the top spot. Woo, he came in awfully hot there. That's going to be interesting to find out if he was able to get it down to pit road speed or not. Giving up the top position here, and it will turn the race lead over to the 25 of Brandon Barkuski. So that'll be our third different race leader of the evening.
I'm seeing in the driver chat right now, looks like Jacob Branski's pitting in. Phil Bedford says he's pitting in on the radio. That could probably signal to Barkuski just in front of him to pit in at the same time to retain his track position. Looks like he is going to. Nick Martin's going to stay out an extra lap and lead a lap. So will Zachary Henry just behind them. RJ Williams is going to follow into the pit lane. So all these drivers are starting to have a bit of a different strategy here at the front of the field. But we're seeing most of these drivers starting to come in now, just managing actually to go 44 laps in their stint, and the drivers who haven't pit yet 45 laps.
And I don't really dislike the strategy by Nick Martin because he was actually reeling in second through fourth. He was on the back bumper of Branski when those drivers were coming down pit lane, so he was putting together some really good lap times in the latter portion of his run. So stay out an extra lap here and see if that extra lap of fresh tires will give you an advantage. Henry in there behind him as well. This is going to turn the race lead over to Hunter Madalinas, but don't forget Madalinas was on pit road about 20 laps ago. Yes, he did unlap himself under green flag conditions, but he is way off sequence from everybody else.
Yeah, and sadly, I think at the time that he pit, he's not going to be able to make the same kind of pit cycle as everybody else. We should be seeing him come in not too long from now, as he pit in about 20-something laps ago, so he's going to at least be anywhere from 10 to 20 laps off of everybody else to make it to the finish.
Look who jumps up to second. Elliot Henderson, who pitted about 6 laps ago. Now, granted, the car behind him, Jacob Manning, has 4 laps fresher tires. He just was on pit lane. That was a huge gain in track position for Elliot Henderson, pitting as early as he did.
The problem is, though, for Elliot Henderson, his laps are 4 laps older than Jacob Manning, 5 laps older than the drivers behind him, and those 5 laps are going to really, really hurt him, as he's already fallen off over a half second from the standard pace, while Jacob Manning just ahead of him, 5 tenths faster than Elliot Henderson that last lap. So he's going to be in a free fall, but Jacob Manning in the pit cycle, look at the gap to the rest of the field, excluding Elliott, a whole straightaway to Brandon Barkuski, who was in second. So excellent pit cycle there for Jacob Manning.
Yeah, that equals out to 4 seconds right now between Manning in second and Barkuski in 4th place. And, I questioned about how fast he came to pit road entry. Apparently did not get a speeding penalty, and I think maybe it was that hot entry onto pit lane that might have helped to gain him all of this track position. The other drivers looked like they were a little bit more conservative getting onto pit lane. So Jacob Manning in full attack mode here today at Atlanta.
I mean, Jacob Manning easily had the best handling race car there at the finish. I did not see him make a single mistake that entire run. At most I ever saw him do was just get a slightly loose on corner exit, but nowhere near enough to hurt the tires. So he was extremely good at handling that long-run race car versus other drivers who may have saved more tire but really struggled at keeping the car underneath them. As we see in this battle between Brandon Barkuski and Jacob Branski for what is currently the 4th position. And I just like what Branski's doing. He's running the lower line, the line that I prefer to run here at Atlanta Motor Speedway when it comes to saving tire. We'll see if it pays off for him on this run.
More than halfway through this race, we have at least one more pit stop looming for these drivers. 12 drivers remain on the racetrack out of the 17 that took the green to start this evening's event. All 12 currently on the lead lap as we speak. And right now, Christopher Heller not really in any danger of going a lap down. He's still got about half the racetrack between himself and race leader Hunter Madalinas. So at this point in time, everybody still in play. We've not seen a caution today for any on-track incidents. We did have the stage caution back at lap 30. Now, it makes things really interesting when you look at the laps that these drivers came down pit lane. For any of these guys, the fuel window could open as soon as lap, 101, 102 for them to be able to make it the rest of the way. I think that if we look at maybe what some of the last drivers hit pit lane, like Nick Martin, he could probably go to lap 110 before he would have to make his final pit stop.
Yeah, I think if we're going to see drivers make their pit stop, I imagine they're probably going to want to try and do it around lap 110, sometime within a 5-lap range of that, just to split this second run in half to make it to the finish, because you're just going to have so much better pace. These tires fall off so heavily at the back end of the runs, especially since, you know, you have that initial fall off at the beginning, you have it kind of stagnate in the middle, and then it really falls off right at the back. If you avoid that back end fall off by pitting again, you're going to be much, much better in shape to win this race.
Nick Martin, who was the last driver to hit pit lane, just now hitting around Zach Henry for the 8th position, and there was a bit of a stack up behind them. Austin Moore, Nathan Nicholson in that mix.
Yeah,
That was actually RJ Williams that Nick Martin was passing. That's Zach Henry in the 12, just ahead of this duo.
Yeah, and Nathan Nicholson versus Elliot Henderson, they both came in on the same lap, but Nathan Nicholson is down here in the what is currently the 11th position, so he is struggling a lot more than what Elliot did. Either whether it was the pit lane, maybe he got a penalty or something, I'm not sure, but he fell off a lot from where the driver who pit on the same lap is right now, as we see Jacob Manning retaking the official lead on the racetrack away from Madalinas, but we expect Madalinas to be coming in anywhere within the next 13 to 14 laps.
And Jacob Manning, of course, trying to get redemption for last week. Even though he didn't win that race, he did gain 10 spots in the standings, up to 9th in points and only 30 points out. You know, it's not exactly out of the realm of possibility with how dominant he's been here today, but you know, we might be possibly looking at Jacob Manning as the new points leader heading into next week at Nashville Super Speedway, when you consider the fact that a bunch of guys that were up there at the top of the point standings coming into this one, points leader Christopher Heller, Nathan Nicholson, they're both running outside of the top 10, and a number of other drivers that took part in the first 2 races of the season are not here tonight, like Daniel Nanny, Aaron Duclos, Richard Tucker. So a big opportunity here for Jacob Manning to not only get that checkered flag that we kind of thought he was going to get last week, but also be able to rack up a lot of points and a lot of positions in the standings to boot. Not certain that think that this might not be the last pit stop for Hunter Madalinas, as he's on pit lane and there's still 57 laps to go. Jacob Manning continuing to show the way. The best battle on the racetrack has been for that 3rd position. What was between Branski and Barkuski is now turned into a battle between Philip Bedford and Jacob Branski, as Barkuski has managed to pass them both. There's the 37 of Elliot Henderson, who has faded back now to the 5th position. So as we watch this battle side by side between the 20 and the 23, remember we saw in the latter portion of that run before they came to pit lane, it seemed like Philip Bedford's car really was unhappy. A lot of movement, very loose off of the corner. So we'll see if he makes any kind of adjustment in how he approaches this run to the final pit stop of the evening, trying to preserve those good years. As soon as I say that, Bedford gets a nice run there onto Barkuski for the 2nd spot. If they get side by side, they'll stall each other out, and that might be an opportunity for Branski to be able to pounce. But this is not for the race lead. This is for the 2nd position, and it's taking place more than 3 seconds behind race leader Jacob Manning. I think there was definitely some contact there between Bedford and Barkuski. That was a close call there off of turn number 4, as they continue to race close quarter from 2nd back to 4th. Other battle going on back behind in the 7th spot. Zach Henry has reeled in RJ Williams in the 21 car for the 7th spot. Yeah, the next time you'll see these Great Lakes Premier Series drivers. They'll be at Nashville Super Speedway. It feels like in the last 3 weeks, including next week, we're going to be talking about tires a lot. Phoenix was a tire save track. Atlanta, a big-time tire save track. And make that Nashville Super Speedway next week very much so falls into that category as well. That, of course, will be next Friday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you guys join us here for that. Here on Flatout Racing Network, as we are about to bring you the final 50 laps of the Great Lakes 225 at Atlanta here this evening. Jacob Manning, Alex brought it up. It's all about execution here today with the unlikelihood of an on-track incident bringing out a yellow flag. And we are seeing that it is all about execution to make sure you win this race. And Jacob Manning has been absolutely stellar in that department. This battle back here is fun to watch, though. Bedford, Barkuski, and Branski trying to figure out who's going to be second, who's going to be third, who's going to be fourth. So right now, they may be feeling that is the highest they'll be able to finish in this race with the pace that Manning is putting on them right now. Every position that a driver can see ahead, they want to get it because a position means points. So for most drivers at this point in time, they are 17 to 20 laps into this run. Elliot Henderson and Nathan Nicholson have been the longest on their runs, and that's about 24 laps for those two drivers. So we know that the absolute furthest they can go would be at around the completion of lap 118. And that would leave them with about 26 laps to go, or make that rather 28 laps to go in this race. Again, there's about a 10-lap buffer in between that portion where they could elect to come to pit lane to make potentially their final pit stops of the night as the battle back on for 7th place. Zach Henry getting awfully loose there on the inside of RJ Williams. These two not willing to really let this battle go. Like they've settled out the battle for second place, at least for the moment. Bedford now back up to the runner-up position. Barkuski back to third, and Branski back to fourth. About a car length and a half separation between those three, but again, they continue to lose ground to Jacob Manning, who is running consistent 33 sixes and has now opened up the gap to 3.5 seconds.
As we're watching here, Jacob Manning leading the field by a massive margin. This is what I expected here at the beginning of the race. I, first of all, apologize. Had some technical difficulties, but we're back, baby, as Jacob Manning is just continuing to stomp the field with the long-run pace that I expected him to have here at the beginning of the race.
And with having 3.5 seconds over those other drivers, I know granted, he's probably got a number in his head of when he's going to come down pit lane for the final pit stop of the day, but, I mean, as a driver, you want to go as fast as you possibly can, but would it be prudent for Jacob Manning to back off just a little bit here, try and preserve those good years a little bit longer? Because with the pace he's running right now, he's gaining about 2 to 3 100ths per lap, and he's got 3.5 seconds to work with.
I mean, I don't think there's any reason for him to back off anymore. I think, as a matter of fact, he probably backed off well enough earlier on in the run, and this is just his tires simply being better at this point in the run, as he had no challenge to force him to push at all. He was just relaxing there with no other driver really to contend with other than having to pass Elliott, who pit really, really early, and now he's just out there on his own, running his own consistent pace, and more the battle further on in the back is going to make it even harder for these drivers to try and fight that.
Let's kind of go inside the head of the drivers there from second through fourth. You're looking at the intervals. You see over 3 seconds between yourselves and the race leader. His goal is clear. He's just going to worry about executing from here to the finish. What is there? What kind of strategy is there that these guys could try and pull off to mount a late race charge for that checkered flag outside of a caution flying?
Well, I mean, the only thing that I can see them doing right now is we are approaching the pit window for these drivers to pit and split this almost perfectly in half, and we're within about 4 to 5 laps of that happening. So if they pit at exactly dead middle or even just a little bit before that to try and gain position on Manning, who they have to hope does not also pit early, that's really the only way they can catch up to him right now. Is the gap is just simply too large. As long as Manning maintains, it's going to be hard for them to run him down.
Yeah, the tough thing too is with having this big of a gap, if these drivers come to pit lane, that would then open the door for Manning to pit the following lap. They can't really catch him by surprise as if they were on his back bumper and then dove to pit lane without allowing him the opportunity to come down on the same lap. So they're kind of between a rock and a hard place right now. But again, it just doesn't seem like there's going to be any possibility at this point in time of a caution flag coming out. The field rather spread out. We've got this three-way battle for second. We've got that battle going on between R.J. Williams and Zach Henry for 7th place. But aside from that, everybody else is just kind of out there. It's more driver battling car battling racetrack than driver battling driver.
Yeah, and I mean, somebody I might end up looking at to see maybe affect the finish of this race a little bit is Elliot Henderson. He had a pretty good pit cycle, even though he pit really, really early. We saw the same person who pit the same lap as him, Nathan Nicholson, did not nearly gain as much track position and hold on nearly as well as Elliot Henderson did. So if he comes in a little bit earlier like he did last time and just stretches it out and ends up gapping the field like he did, we could see him maybe even win this race. I said some pretty scary words there maybe for him, but there's a chance at it if things go right for him.
The fuel window is open at this point in time for drivers to be able to make it the rest of the way, and we just saw 11 of Christopher Heller come down pit lane. Now, he's got that victory last week at Phoenix. Did that give him the luxury to maybe try something a little bit unorthodox, a little bit outside of the box here to at least maybe try and get up there inside of the top 5 in the closing stages?
Well, sadly, during that pit cycle, he went 2 laps down. Now, while he did just get 1 back right now, that is just simply too big of a margin for him to make up, I think. I feel like if you're going to win this race after coming into the pit lane early, you can't fall any more than 1 lap down, and even more so, not even any more than a lap and a half. So I think Heller might just be too far back, especially with the damage we saw him get earlier in the race.
Battle's going to be brewing for the 5th position. Nick Martin has been slowly hunting down the 37 of Elliot Henderson. If he gets alongside, if Henderson is not able to make the pass quick, R.J. Williams and Zach Henry, they're in the same vicinity. They could get up here as well, so we could have ourselves a 4-way battle for the top 5. And boy, just this pan camera looking down the back straight, you can see how those cars get so loose in the back end, almost kind of looks like they're skewed when they enter onto the back straightaway.
Yeah, I mean, these cars do actually step out a good bit here at this racetrack. It does feel, with the racetrack this hot, that the cars almost float over top of it. You don't feel very, very planted in the track, and that's kind of why we see some of these drivers lose control of it, as the front end just feels so light versus what you normally expect to have in these cars, as the battle right now is raging for that 2nd position. But these drivers might want to try and get it sorted out soon, as they're probably going to be coming into the pit lane at, I would imagine, within the next 5 laps. I don't see them staying out any longer than that.
Well, almost 3 wide for 2nd place as Bartkowski backed out. Branski kept his foot in it. He'll pass Bartkowski for 3rd place. Tried to get 2 for the price of 1 here through 1 and 2, and might end up coming out on the losing end of it. Instead of getting up to 2nd, he might drop back to 4th again, which indeed he does.
All right, I'm hearing over the radio, Elliot Henderson is coming into the pit lane. That is going to be a bit of a game changer right there, especially for the drivers we were watching there from 2nd to 4th, as he could easily jump them on track position. It's just a matter of how late does Jacob Manning come in, and can he jump Jacob Manning too? Because if that happens and he's able to run a solid enough pace, we may, by some surprise, see him with a shot to win.
Well, he came in, what, I believe 4 laps before Jacob Manning did on the last cycle green flag pit stops. And when everything cycled around, he had a minuscule 2 car lengths, but nonetheless cycled out as the race leader over the 1 car. So with coming down pit lane this early, who knows, that
Well,
might
we've got a bit of a
translate.
situation going on. All the drivers second to fourth came into the pit lane at once, and I have reason to believe Phil Bedford easily sped on the pit lane as he had locked it up super hard on pit entry. We'll have to see if he's stuck in his box for a long time, but I think for certain he sped on pit lane there.
RJ Williams also down pit lane this time, so now the ball is in the court of one Jacob Manning. How long do you wait? How long do you stay out? Is there an advantage maybe of coming down a little bit later and taking advantage of those fresh tires? You know, if you think about it too, for Jacob Manning, he should be able to go maybe another 9 laps, which would put him in the vicinity of, what, 23 laps to go. It would give him the opportunity to maybe go a little bit harder in the early going of his run, knowing that he doesn't have to make an entire full fuel run to the checkered flag.
I think if he wants to win this race, he's got to come in either now or within the next lap. You can't just lose that much track position this late in the race, but he stays out another lap. I'm a bit worried about that. And to also update on the pit road situation, Phil Bedford is back out on the racetrack, seemingly with no penalty there as the first driver to come into the pits. So didn't seem like he sped on pit lane. It was just a really, really fast entry.
Yeah, we'll have to see about his lap times in comparison to Jacob Manning here, depending on just how much longer Manning keeps his race car out on the track. Like he's going to stay out yet another lap here. We're also waiting for Zach Henry, Austin Moore, Nathan Nicholson to make their final trips to pit road. And like I said, when we saw Madalenas come down pit lane about 25 laps ago, I don't think he can make it the rest of the way. I think he's going to have to pit at least one more time as well.
I'm worried here, Seth. I don't like Jacob Manning staying out for this long. He doesn't need to go to the end of this fuel run. The fuel window's open by a solid amount. It's only 31 laps to the end now. He has to come in now. I'm shocked that he's staying out as long as he is.
Yeah, just looked at the lap times, and even though Bedford, Branski, and Barkuski are still battling back in the 6th or 8th position, that last time by, they ran 2 seconds faster than Jacob Manning.
Yeah, that 2 seconds is detrimental to him because they were only about 3 to 4 seconds back, so they've already cleared Jacob Manning by well over 4 seconds by this point with how long he stayed out. And I'm seeing him at the bottom of the racetrack now. I think he's now finally coming into the pit lane, but I think it just might be a little bit too late for him.
And I think the gap was, what, about 4 seconds from Manning back to the second place battle before these pit stops began. So it'll be interesting to see if those 4 seconds that they gained right there with those fresh tires, if that translates to them, if not being ahead of Jacob Manning, at least being right on his back door with 30 laps to go.
Well, luckily, it did look like Jacob Manning did have a very, very good pit road entry like he did last time, so he might have minimized the damage just a little bit, but he's most definitely going to be back there in that 4th, maybe even 5th position, depending on where Elliot Henderson comes out. But I just don't get staying out that long after your competitor's pit. Yep, there he goes. He gets jumped by, what was 2nd, 3rd, 4th, jumped by Elliot Henderson. As he jumps by any more drivers, Nick Martin's on the way down to turn 1. He may get out before him, but this is so much track position lost with so few laps left in the race.
It's been a long time here since we've seen Jacob Manning have to deal with traffic. So you got to wonder how that's going to affect him in his ability to charge back up to the front. Right now, race leader is Austin Moore. He could go maybe another 2 laps here. I think Austin Moore might be playing the strategy of a caution maybe coming out and trapping some people a lap down, but I think he is going to have to bite the bullet and pit. Yeah, he's coming in this time, so he'll turn the race lead over temporarily to Hunter Madalenas, but we're going to keep it here on the battle, what's going to be now for 2nd place, and eventually, potentially, the race lead when Madalenas has to come to pit road. Bedford trying now to go coast to coast in Atlanta, but Branski, Barkuski, these 3 have been buddies all race long, and how ironic they find themselves all together here with less than 30 to go, and a potential checkered flag on the line.
Yeah, these 3 have been at it the entire race, and I think the bit of a miss from Jacob Manning is going to allow them to probably win this race. Now, if a caution does manage to come out, I mean, the driver we thought was completely out of it, Hunter Madalinas, could find his way into victory lane because he's still got a good number of laps to stay out there and still stay on the lead lap, but I don't think we're going to see that. These drivers have just been too separated, too clean today for that to happen, and as of right now, it looks like these are the 3 drivers to win the race.
So I'm looking at Jacob Manning. You talked about drivers in the early portions of this race, pretty much saying sayonara to them if they ran into the 31-second bracket. Fastest lap of the race was just set that last time by a 31.912 for Jacob Manning. Now, while that's good in his case to get back up here to the lead, the question is, if he's setting a blaze like this, just how much is he going to have left when he finally catches up to these guys?
I mean, the slight advantage he does have is that he doesn't have to do a full fuel run, but none of the drivers did a full fuel run that last run by, and he had phenomenal pace. He was pulling away 10th by 10th at the end of the run. If he just ran the normal pace that he ran, he might have had a shot at getting up to them and passing them because he's only about 2.5 seconds off of them. But if he's running this fast, he could kill his tires, as once again he runs a 32.0, which I think is just too fast for this early on in the run.
Right around Elliot Henderson, who right now, as things would cycle at the end of the race, would be in line for a top 5 finish. Bedford has actually gapped Branski and Barkuski, so is Bedford looking at the lap times that are being laid down by the one and saying, hey, I can't wait any longer, I can't save any longer, I gotta get going.
I mean, I would love to be in Phil Bedford's position right now because you have 2 more drivers behind you that are equal to you on tire, and you're in the clean air in the lead. That driver on new tire has to pass the both of them first before he can even get to you. So I personally would not be pushing that hard. I would just make sure I'm going quick enough to have those 2 behind me, because once Jacob Manning gets up to them, I imagine he might be able to. He's just going to check them up a lot, and I don't know. I mean, Jacob Manning's actually already up there. As a matter of fact, I wasn't sure if that was Hunter Madalinas, but that's actually Jacob Manning just behind them right now. He's run a phenomenal pace, and he's already up to him.
And I will have to see what he's able to do on the bottom, because I'm trying to remember back to the early stages when he fought his way up to the race lead. I don't remember if he ran the bottom an awful lot. Obviously, these drivers are not going to yield him the top line. They're all trying to take the faster way around the racetrack, but he doesn't care. Easily makes the pass on Barkuski for 3rd, and now we'll look for 2nd. Madalinas, we did see him hit pit road for his final pit stop of the day. Looks like, unless things change, he will finish back in the 11th spot as Nathan Nicholson went to the garage area about 9 laps ago, and here comes Manning again, this time for 2nd place.
I mean, I truly am surprised at this. I think he just had such a good pit entry, pit exit, and was just so good in the whole pit road execution that even though he lost so much time on the racetrack because of the tires, he's just minimized the damage enough to be right up to these guys so soon before the end. I mean, they still have 20 laps to go before the end of this race. He's got plenty of time to do this, and he's already right behind the leader.
You know, it's interesting. We were kind of questioning his strategy and everything, but we shouldn't have been surprised. He's doing what his sponsor says. He went rogue with his strategy, and it's working out as he's going to dive to the inside, and he is going to clear Philip Bedford for the top position. He'll go back to the race lead, and now the question is, now that he's got the race lead, does he back the pace down a little bit here because he does have a tire advantage to his competition, or does he kind of run that one car for all it's worth? Because it's still 20 laps to go. That's still a long ways in Atlanta.
I mean, he clearly has the pace, he clearly has the tire, and he's already in the lead, still running multiple tenths faster a lap. By this point, he could just relax and go on a picnic holiday because he's got such a massive advantage over everybody else behind him that he should comfortably win this race if we don't get a caution.
He can just look out the windshield one direction. He does not have to look, which he will be very relieved about, as he does not have to look at the fuel. He knows he's going to be able to make it to the conclusion of this race here today at Atlanta, and he's put on a clinic. He wasn't up at the front in the early stages of this race. It was really the Bedford and Branski show in the first stage, but once that stage caution came out, they all bunched up. It's been all Jacob Manning up to that point.
Yeah, and I mean, the 2 drivers that ended up kind of joining that big battle in Jacob Manning and then Barkuski, they're they're two of the best drivers at saving tires in this entire league I've noticed so far. So I'm not particularly surprised at all. And to see Jacob Manning after the performance he put in last week on just raw pace, I'm not surprised to see this again. And I'm sure he's also very happy that fuel is not in the question. He could just run away with this now.
You talk about drivers that are good at tire conservation. I mentioned the fact that last week at Phoenix, it was all about tires. Here today at Atlanta, it's all about tires. Are there kind of tricks of the trade from the last 2 weeks that drivers will be able to utilize when we get to Nashville Superspeedway next week, which again is another track that's very difficult on the good years?
Ooh, I think Nashville Superspeedway is essentially if you took Atlanta Motor Speedway and you took Phoenix Raceway and how they drive and just slammed them together in the same racetrack. I mean, it's a racetrack that is right in the middle on size. It is right in the middle of banking as Barkuski got into the wall. Oh no, this late in the race, that could really, really hurt him. Luckily, he's only got about 16, 17 laps to go before the end of this race, but that's going to make it a lot harder for him to make up any track position.
Doesn't look like it killed his pace. He's still right there with Branski, and he does have 1 lap fresher tires than Elliott Henderson behind him. There's 2 seconds difference there, so I don't think that's going to hurt him in his attempt to finish up inside of the top 4, but it might hurt him in terms of now the handling of his race car in any future attempts to get that final podium spot from Branski in these final 15 laps.
Now, I don't mean to put any pressure on if any of these two drivers battling for third, but they're battling for the interview position here. So,
right.
Guys, if you want to shout out some people, you got to get that third spot. Come on, let's see it.
It's like Christopher Heller, last week's winner, kind of struggled immediately out of the gate here tonight at Atlanta. He's going to go a lap down, and more importantly, he may end up actually losing the final spot inside the top 10. That right there, with Madalinas in the 9 going around the top side, is the battle for the free pass position. First car 1 lap down and 10th place. And Madalina's actually going to try and finish this race on the lead lap. Fresher tires, he will easily blow by Jacob Manning and put himself back on the lead lap here to finish this race out.
Yeah, a little bit of an unfortunate story there for Hunter Madalinas. He did seem to have some really, really strong pace early on in the race, but just some damage knocked him out of it, and a pit cycle when no cautions came out that took him off cycle. He's kind of fallen out of this, but he's made a solid recovery to be able to stay on the lead lap the whole race. So solid run for him, just didn't go the way he wanted. But what we're looking at right now is Jacob Branski, who's actually gapped Barkuski, so it does look like that damage is definitely affecting Barkuski. He's most likely not going to be able to get that third position, and even though you said maybe not worry about Elliot Henderson, it kind of looks like he's running a little bit faster than Barkuski a lap. That was a 10th that time by.
You are correct, actually. What was 2 seconds between 4th to 5th has now been cut down by about 0.3 to 1.7 seconds. So yeah, still time for Elliot Henderson to be able to get up here and snag another position away from Brandon Barkuski. But still, all in all, going to be a good points day for the driver of the 25. We mentioned he has struggled in the first 2 races to finish inside of the top 10, and here today looks like he's going to get his best finish of the season so far. Is Jacob Manning now, I think he's just waiting until he comes around out of turn 4 and sees the flagman waving the white flag. These 12 laps, these final 12 laps have kind of got to be grueling for him, saying, man, I've led so much of this race. When's it finally going to be over? Let's get this thing done with.
Yeah, this is honestly one of the most stressful positions to be in if you're a driver that constantly thinks about the caution, because you are just sitting there worried the whole time, like, is there a caution? Is there a caution? Please don't be a caution. Please don't be a caution. It's something that's tough to learn, to just relax and realize even if there is a caution, you'll probably still be fine because you're in the lead. But there's always that worry in your mind that something's going to happen. But it doesn't look like it's hurting him right now, as he's still pulling away by multiple tenths a lap.
And right now it looks like the battle for third may be our best battle here in the final 10 laps of this race. Everybody else is separated by almost a second or more for position. Barkuski mounting a little bit of a comeback here on Branski. He's closed it up to 3.5 car lengths, but this is more than likely going to be our only battle on track coming to the finish, and it is again for that final spot on the podium.
I mean, now that these drivers are getting within 10 laps to go, they might just push the race car just a little bit harder, not worrying about the tires nearly as much. Now, at most other racetracks, that won't really be an issue, but sometimes you forget that you're at Atlanta Motor Speedway when you see 10 laps to go on that ticker, now 9 laps to go. You're thinking, all right, we're right here at the end. I don't need to worry about another pit stop. I don't need to worry about the rest of the run. I just got to go, 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 go. You forget this is still Atlanta Motor Speedway. You run one lap a little too hard, you're done. You're absolutely done.
And Atlanta here tonight has certainly played its part into shaking up the point standings as well. The drivers that came in first and second right now running on the tail end of the field, and the first car out in the garage area, 11th and 12th. It's a lot of drivers I'm seeing here that are going to jump up in the points standings. Zach Henry right now running in 6th. He was 3rd in points coming into this race. Elliott Henderson, if he finishes up inside the top 5, he was 5th in points coming to this one. And of course, race leader Jacob Manning and Jacob Branski, they came in 9th and 10th. We're going to be seeing a lot of pluses and minuses in the point standings heading into Nashville next week for sure.
Oh, yeah, and I expect Jacob Manning to make a big jump in the standings. I mean, he was the biggest jump last week at Phoenix, even with the finish that he had after the pit stop. And so I imagine him jumping a lot of people today. But surprisingly enough, Elliot Henderson sitting there actually tied for 5th in the point standings. And if he gets a top 5 here, he'll make up a lot of spots over a lot of the drivers ahead of him. Zach Henry just behind him is actually in the 3rd position in the point standings. So there's a couple drivers that we didn't really talk about a lot in the points, as we didn't expect them to, run as well as they have versus some of these other guys, but they're going to make up some good spots in the point standings.
And if Jacob Manning's able to close out the deal here today, it'll be back-to-back victories for 2511 Racing. It was interesting. We had, I think it was 3 of the 2511 drivers up inside of the top 4 for most of the Phoenix race, Manning as well as Heller. And we also had Zach Henry up there for a time. And really, when you consider that team here today, the only one that has kind of been solid has been Jacob Manning. Zachary Henry's kept himself out of trouble, but has not really been able to break into the top 5 here in this race.
Yeah, and I mean, just in the terms of like Zach Henry, for example, I mean, he ran a pretty solid race pace-wise. Maybe it was a little bit of a miss of execution on the pit lane, as I noticed that's the areas where some of the drivers outside of this top 4, top 5 really lost a lot of time. And I mean, that's something you don't really have a lot of time to practice. Like, you could try and practice it on your own, but unless you're in a race run, it's really hard to figure out what exactly your conditions are going to be for pit road entry. And for almost every fixed race here on iRacing, you don't really deal with green flag pit stops almost ever. So for a lot of these guys, they may just not be used to doing green flag pit stops, and that's where we see some of these drivers out front really take advantage.
Well, the sun has not been able to decide what it wants to do here today either. It has made the track conditions change on and off, as just moments ago we were bathed in shadows. We're back in sunlight again here for the final 4.5 laps of this race. Jacob Manning just continuing to hit his marks. His pace has backed off a little bit. He's running 3+ seconds back to Philip Bedford in firm control of that spot. Branski now has more than half a second back to Barkuski. I think now at this point, basically everybody is where they is. They're just trying to make sure that they nurse these machines back to the start-finish line.
Yeah, and for Jacob Manning, I mean, he just put on a clinic to them today after that stage break restart where he took the lead away from Phil Bedford. He's been out front ever since, and it's just ran an exceptionally strong race. It might be curious about what he learned in that first stage, because he definitely wasn't up there at the beginning, but once he got up there, he stayed up there and must have learned something. So I'm curious as to what he learned today as we're on to 2 laps to go.
Outside of the fact he wasn't able to make it on fuel last week at Phoenix, he has really shown the last couple of weeks at very higher abrasive tracks that he is a force to be reckoned with. So I think there's no doubt we're going to be looking at him as one of the favorites next week at Nashville Superspeedway to possibly go back to victory lane, as this time by, finally the sight he's been waiting to see for maybe the last 20 laps. He'll see the flagman waving the white over his hood, 1.5 miles away from his first victory of the season in the Great Lakes Premier Series.
Yeah, Jacob Manning looking for redemption after last week. I mean, on just pace alone, he deserved to win that race. He was easily one of the strongest drivers there last week at Phoenix International Raceway. But coming through turns 3 and 4, he reestablished himself tonight. Fuel not in the question as he rounds turn 4. He will stomp the field by over 3.5 seconds. A phenomenal race for Jacob Manning as he wins at Atlanta Motor Speedway in the Great Lakes Premier Series.
Well, any doubts he had in the back of his mind, anything lingering from last week, that's gone.
And
Phoenix never happened.
I just noticed a bit of a finishing conundrum there in the back. Brandon Barkuski only finished a half second ahead of Elliot Henderson there at the end. I'm not sure what happened with Barkuski, but that was extremely close for the 4th spot.
Hang on, though. Behind Branski, Henderson completes the top 5. We had 10 of our remaining 11 drivers finish on the lead lap, and Jacob Manning, for the first time this season, now gets to come down, and he'll do some burnouts maybe 1 week later than he expected, but is to do it here now in front of these Atlanta fans.
Jacob Manning there's not much more you could say about it. He just ran a phenomenal race pretty much from start to finish. And the drivers we expected to see out front after seeing that first run ended up being the drivers who were out front there at the end. And green flags. After that stage, fully green to the finish. That's exactly what we thought at the beginning. And the drivers who were good on those long runs were the drivers who were out front here at the end. And the driver who did it the best is doing some burnouts there in the pit lane, Jacob Manning.
Yeah, it was the word that you said, execution. That's exactly what Jacob Manning did here today, whether it was on the racetrack or on pit road. Well-deserved burnouts there for the driver of the 1, finishes P1 here in the Great Lakes 225 at Atlanta, and he will be heading to victory lane in just a moment as we take a look at the finishing results from this evening's event. And a couple of names up there that we really didn't see in the first 2 weeks. Nice to see them up there. Bedford, we wondered about the qualifying speed that he had starting on the pole for the 2nd straight week. Well, followed it up with really good race speed. Branski up inside of the podium. I believe that's for the first time this season. And then Barkuski there as well. First time up inside the top 10, gets a top 5 run.
I mean, just a solid night overall. I think, compared to last week, we saw a lot of drivers who were very, very good at handling the brakes and managing their race cars around some very, very slow corners. But tonight we saw drivers who are very, very good at managing their long runs, especially the drivers who can keep their car the most consistent the whole time. So when we go to racetracks like that, we're going to be watching out for all the drivers who finished in the top 5, top 6 here for the win in those events.
Kind of on the flip side, you wonder what if for drivers that sustain damage in the early going. We know that Hunter Madalinas is fast at wherever we go. We know that Christopher Heller is fast wherever we go. Nathan Nicholson as well. And those drivers finished 10th, 11th, and 12th here this evening. Atlanta was not kind to those drivers.
Yeah, some of them that really I would have expected to be further up. Christopher Heller, Hunter Madalinas. I mean, we saw Austin Moore up there earlier in the race. They just didn't end up having the night they needed to. Obviously, damage being the big question. For some of them, it was just a mismatch of pit cycles. For others, it was just a lack of just super long run pace. And it really bit them tonight. And we also saw a surprising amount of DNFs from the race tonight. I mean, all the way from 12th to 17th, 5 full drivers DNF tonight. So we saw a lot of incidents out there that didn't end up bringing cautions.
We did indeed, but green flag pretty much from start to finish with the exception of that stage caution. No caution for on-track incidents here tonight, so these guys putting on a heck of a show and being able to keep their car straight at a track that's not exactly famed for your abilities to be able to keep the car pointed in the correct direction. Not to say that they weren't sliding off the corner and maybe pointing the wrong way a couple of times, but they were able to manage those race cars and keep them under them, at least for the most part. But Alex, I think we've got some podium finishers here on standby for interviews.
Yeah, we're going to talk up to here first. 3rd place finisher Jacob Branski ran a very, very solid race there at the beginning. Tell us what you were dealing with throughout that race, because you, Phil Bedford, and Brandon Barkuski were on top of each other that entire time.
Yeah, that was a very good race between us. I wish that was the race for the lead, but Manning was just, going crazy out there. He short pit us earlier on, got up 4 seconds ahead of us, and then was just going and kept that gap the whole race. But it was really fun racing Phil and Brandon out there, super close the whole time.
Now, I do want to ask a little bit about the first stage, before we had that caution. It was just between you and Phil Bedford. We didn't see Jacob Manning up there at all yet. We didn't see Brandon Barkuski up there at all yet. After that first stage, was that who you were thinking you were going to battle with? Did you think it was just going to be between you and Phil Bedford, or did you know that there were people going to be coming up there after that caution?
I was hoping it was just going to be me and Phil, but I think that they were getting held up a little bit in that first run and still figuring stuff out. So I knew that they would definitely be in the picture, and they were for sure.
I mean, we know Barkuski is a very, very solid driver on these long runs. We saw Jacob Manning very strong in the long runs, but how would you credit yourself on the long runs? We saw you running pretty solid throughout the race from start to finish. You didn't seem to have to figure it out early on. What was your practice time spent doing? Were you doing those longer runs to practice for it?
Yeah, in the practice, me and Brandon actually did a field run earlier before this race, and then that was pretty much it. Just trying to figure out what the car was going to do on the long run, like if it was going to get loose or tight, and it kind of was a mixture of both. So it was just all about saving tires and being smooth, basically. But I mean, we ran good, just not good enough to win.
All right. Well, you saved tires very excellently, well enough to get yourself into the third position, the interview spot, as I like to call it. Battle for the interview spot. So you earned the right for it. Who were you thanking for tonight's finish?
Thanking you guys and the league owners. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in and talk to us, Jacob Branski, and congrats.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, and the driver who looked to be the strongest there in the first stage manages to only come away with a second place finish here tonight. Phil Bedford, welcome to the booth. You had a strong race tonight. It just wasn't enough to catch Jacob Manning. Did you think you had some more in it to do it?
No, I did the wrong pit strategy, so he got me on that. And then I hadn't practiced at all, so I did. Sorry, my kids are yelling.
Oh, don't worry, it's fine. The kids are always fun to have. They're like watching you, right?
Yeah, I had to close the door real quick because I knew you were going to talk to me. He's still screaming over it. Anyways, yeah, I hadn't practiced all week. I wanted to, and then kind of learned the long run on that third run, and kind of wished I had that line the first two, because then I think I would have had a better chance.
I mean, I'm interested to ask, what was that line? Because clearly you pulled away from Jacob Branski there. I noticed your lap times were starting to get a little bit closer to Jacob Manning there at the end. I mean, you started off pretty good. I mean, you and Jacob Branski pulled away from the field, but what was it there at the end that you found out that you wish you knew early on?
Well, the first run, I kind of burned off my right rear because I was trying to cut it too much, and I noticed Brandon was running more of a tighter line, and he kind of killed his right front. So the second run, I tried to mix it up and kind of keep the car even, but I started racing a little too much to try and catch up, so I still melted it even worse. So that third run, I had to be hard on myself just not to kill it, and that was it. And then back up 3 and 4 a little more than I had been, and that seemed to be perfect. I wasn't sliding at all. My car was very balanced that whole last run.
Now, I asked this a little bit for Jacob Branski as well, as you two were pretty much the dominant drivers of the first stage. But after that first stage, did you think it was just going to be between you two, or did you know that there were some people coming up through the field?
No, I knew. I had a feeling to be between the two Jacobs, myself and Brandon, because it seemed like us four would pull away from the rest of the field, and then the three of us were on the same pit strategy. So as long as we stayed together, we had a good shot. But Jacob Manning pitted 1 lap earlier, and I was debating on doing that, but I made the wrong call.
All right, well, it may not have been the call that you wanted to help yourself win the race, but you still managed to come away with a second place finish, a good points day, and most importantly of all, you get the opportunity to thank the people for the finish tonight. So who are those people?
Oh, my wife always takes care of the kids, so they're not yanking on my wheel as I'm trying to race. So I appreciate that, which has happened before. And got to thank Cole Bradley, my team. Oh, he wasn't here today. Never mind. Punk. And then, no, but really the top 4 guys, we raced hard and clean. And I love that. Brandon gave me a bump and run earlier, and it was perfect bump and run. Got me up high, and I just love that racing. The last 2 weeks wasn't as fortunate, but that was good racing we had tonight, so I liked it. So I appreciate everyone for racing that way. Hopefully we can continue that type of style.
Yeah, you guys had a phenomenal race tonight. You came away there with a second place finish. So thank you for coming up to talk to us, and congrats.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for you guys too.
All right, and the driver who really was the star of the show tonight, the winner of tonight's race, Jacob Manning. Jacob, tell us about your night, because you really put on a clinic on the rest of this field.
Oh man! First of all, how's it going, guys? I don't know. I've always loved Atlanta because it's slick, and I really know how to save my tires well. So I had good expectations coming in. I did, I don't know, a few laps probably of qualifying practice throughout the week, and it felt okay. It was decent. Came in here and completely different to what I expected. It was plowing on entry. It was a whole dump truck. And then on exit, it was wanting to fly away. So it took some adapting to get used to that and learning the line. Atlanta's always been a low line track, and then they're all running the top and, tenths a lap faster. So I had to move up there after a few laps of realizing that wasn't going to work, then pass them all back. And I guess it just worked out my way. First pit stop. I'll tell you what, 1 lap is the difference. 4 seconds, just 1 lap earlier than all of them. So strategy is a big deal.
Yeah, strategy was a massive deal, and that was something I was actually almost panicking for you about there at the finish of the race. All the other drivers behind you, Bedford, Branski, and Barkowski, all came in almost 4 or 5 laps earlier than you did. I mean, what was the strategy going on in your head? Because I frankly thought that was almost the wrong call, but it eventually ended up working.
Well, I saw after I came out the first time, Elliott was on about 4 or 5 laps, older tires, and I flew right past him. So when I saw them all pit, I was like, man, it's way too early for me to be comfortable pitting. With fuel, I thought it was going to be tighter than it was. Turns out I was wrong. I was about 10 laps to the good at the very end there. So I was wrong on the fuel strategy wise on the last one, but I knew that I would catch them as long as they weren't too far ahead. It was a little bit iffy when I came out, but they were only 4 seconds ahead. So I was like, we'll see what we can do. And I guess I just tracked them down and got past them. But, man, I'll tell you what, Phil Bedford saved his tires amazing. He was only 3.1 back. I thought he was going to be way more than that. So he's a tire-saving machine.
Yeah, he was telling us he found something there at the end, but how long did it take you to find out something? Because there at the first stage, you were a little bit further back in the field. Didn't seem to be as much of the dominant driver as you were there at the end of the race. So was it after that first stage you just needed that reset, or was it even a little bit before that?
I mean, I just, at the beginning of the race, I don't like to go too hard and show my cards early. I kind of like to sit back, save the tires, and then once everyone else has burnt their stuff up, I'll drive right by them. That's kind of how I've always been. So I thought the low line was going to be good at first. So the first, 10 laps maybe, I was running the bottom. And then I was just getting passed left and right by the top lane. So I was like, I got to change something here. So I went up to the top, tried to pass on the bottom a few times, and it just didn't work. The bottom was not sticking at all tonight. So I learned to just stay on the top. The caution worked out in my favor at the stage break. Came out third, which was awesome. And then, what was it? Nathan just spun his tires, so I was up to second, and then I had to pass Phil there. He just kind of let me go. He thought I was going to burn my stuff up, and I guess, saved well enough that it wasn't where they were going to fly by me or anything. They just kind of got within 3/10 and stayed there. Go back, they'd catch back up to 3/10, kind of stay there. They wouldn't really catch up to me too close to make me uncomfortable. So I guess the high line was just the way to go tonight.
All right, now I wish to ask you this question just before we start thanking people. How do you feel your chances are heading into Nashville Super Speedway? We've noticed you have some really, really strong long run pace, and that's another racetrack where tires saving is a big deal. So what do you think your chances are next week?
I'm going to be honest, I got absolutely no clue. I've done one race there, I think, in the trucks, and I was not very good. So if I can figure the line out, then I think I'll be fine. But besides that, I'm not too overly enthusiastic.
All right, well, we'll be interested to see you next week, but before we let you go, you got to thank some people, thanks to sponsors, friends, family, so what have you. What are they?
Well, first and foremost, I got sponsors for my, I guess you could call it an esports team. We got Rogue Energy is the main sponsor, which you can use 10% code off. JW Racing, you get 10% off. It's awesome. Saloon Door Sports, Merit Mechanical, Roof Sport, and everyone who supports me, my family, Deborah, Don, everyone who's in here watching, it helps me to go 100% every week and come out here and try my best to do it and not go up and hit the wall while leading at Phoenix.
Yeah, that was almost a little bit of a heartbreak there at Phoenix last week, but it wasn't heartbreak here tonight. You won at Atlanta Motor Speedway pretty dominantly, so thank you for coming in to talk to us, and congratulations on that.
Of course. Thank you, guys.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was our podium finish drivers for interview tonight. Seth, what'd you think about the race?
I mean, we kind of thought about it coming in with the drivers we had in the field. The likelihood that we would end up seeing a caution outside the stage yellows seemed rather unlikely, and it was going to come down to who was able to work the strategy perfectly and who was going to be able to preserve their tires. And if you look at the top four drivers here this evening, those were drivers that fit the bill. Jacob Manning had that a slightly different strategy, but it worked out in the end. Bedford, as Manning even alluded to, seemed to be one of the best to save tires. Branski and Barkuski were up there with him as well. I mean, it just seemed like those three couldn't shake each other. So Atlanta here tonight, it rewarded those that preserved the tires and executed.
Yeah, it definitely did indeed, and I'm going to be watching for that next week at Nashville Super Speedway. Racetrack that I personally actually struggle at just because of the nature of the racetrack. It's a very weird line you have to take to try and get around those corners. So I want to see if these same drivers are able to adapt to that, or if we're going to see a new set of faces there at the front of the field.
It's also going to be interesting to see with Atlanta here tonight really shaking up the point standings if Nashville does that as well. It's kind of seemed that both Phoenix and Atlanta, two tracks where it comes down to conservation, it's really had pros and cons for different drivers through the field. So, to your point, it'd be interesting to see if the same faces that we saw up at the front here tonight are up at the front next week, or some of those drivers that came into this season at Daytona with great runs, were up there in the top 5 in the point standings, but struggled here tonight, if they can mount a bit of a comeback next week.
Next week is ought to be exciting, so remember to tune back in to the Flatout Racing Network, 8:30 p.m. Friday night EST. My name's Alex Kolnix, alongside me Seth Cole, and we appreciate you for coming in to the Flatout Racing Network for tonight's race, and goodbye.
This broadcast is the copyrighted work of Flatout Racing Network and may not be rebroadcast, retranslated, or used in any form without the express written consent of Flatout Racing Network and iRacing.com Motorsports Simulations. Flatout Racing Network would like to thank you for your support, and we hope you enjoyed tonight's broadcast.